So we are we are here culminating but not ending. It's all a process in struggle. It's all a process in life. I hope there has been extensive learning throughout the way. What we have today is the culmination of day 2. We have our closing keynote speaker, and also we will have student performances, spoken word by Shannon and Carly, back by popular demand. People were asking, could they perform again? And I think it's important that they do and that we open with them. But before that, I want to acknowledge the groups that have made this event possible. You know, it's like when you show up at somebody's home, they made the food. Somebody is doing the dishes. Somebody's doing the backstage work. So this is made possible through collective efforts that have been underway since September of last year. And I would like to thank the following organizing collective. It's Anat Herzog, Dr. Susie Suhu. Yeah. Dr. Catherine Ye, and Catherine's somewhere in here, I saw her. Anaida Colon Muñiz. Richard Romero, Orange County Office of Ed. Laura Burns. There are staff in the college who do tremendous work, and they don't get to do what I do, which is be up here and you have a camera and you get to be famous. Stacy Nagai, who's also staff. We have also Nick Henning, California name. And I mentioned I am teaching the very first historically ethnic studies course at Chapman, so it's the LEAD 429 ethnic studies activism students. It's Farah Sue, Samantha Barnes, Carly Waterbury, Annabelle Liao, and Shannon Estrin. So let's give them an applause. But also, this would never have been possible if it was just us as a collective. And there always has to be some kind of institutional support. So I want to thank our Associate Dean of Students, Michelle Samura. And somebody who I forgot to thank yesterday, and I told myself, and my wife says, you messed up. and I did, and I apologize, and it's our Dean, Margaret Grogan. Because we know that there has to be some vision and alignment with what you do, and your deans have to see that as important work. The same with public schools. If administrators are not seeing and validating what that vision is, they tend not to support. So I'm very thankful on behalf of everybody. Dr. Zawala, yeah. But I should not forget all the presenters, and it's so many of you. So let's give a round of applause to presenters. The students that are here, we had a big number. The teachers in the house, where are the teachers? Yeah. The parents in the house, we had parents here. The community activists and organizers. And I know you're there because when we saw the registration, it said 18% community activist and organizer. We don't want to forget anybody, but it's a beautiful space. I'm very happy to be here. I'm also tired. I'm losing my voice. But without further ado, Shannon and Carly.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shannon once again. And I am in great honor to introduce Dr. Melina Abdullah. Dr. Melina Abdullah is a professor at Cal State LA in the Pan-African Studies of her credentials are, she got her bachelor's from Howard University in African American Studies and her PhD and her master's in political science. And please let me introduce Dr. Melina Abdullah. Thank you.
So hello, everyone. I feel very thankful to be here, to have gotten here safely. Thank you, Chris, for reminding me that it's most important for me to get here safely instead of getting here on time. So I appreciate it. I am thankful to Miguel, who Dr. Zavala and I actually met when we were working together for the ELP Summer Bridge Program at Cal State LA. And along with Dr. Carlos Tejeda, we were working on transitioning students from high school. How many of you know about ELP or ELP students? Yeah. So you know how important that is, right? Really trying to develop a class that gave students a sense of themselves. It was a Pan-African Studies class called Race and Ethnicity. And together we developed not just a what we teach, but approach to teaching that we think is really grounded in who we are as ethnic studies scholars and activists. And so I was asked by Miguel to talk about scholar activism today. And so I want to kind of just frame the moment that we're in. I want to say how much I appreciate you for bringing me here. Shannon, it was so great to meet you. So we had an opportunity to meet. Shannon, I had an opportunity to meet. He came up to Cal State LA last week and spend a couple hours together. So I really appreciate meeting you. And then Chris Jackson, I'm going to talk about in a second. But thank you for the reminder. You didn't know you were going to wind up in the talk, huh, Chris? No. So today was a crazy day for me. I don't know how many of you know what's been going on with this struggle for our lives, if you've been paying attention. But yesterday marked a moment, a transition. In addition to being a professor of Pan-African Studies, I'm one of the original members of Black Lives Matter and a core organizer in Los Angeles, and also contributing to the strategy table globally. So one of the things that was visited upon me, and I want to be really clear because yesterday I committed myself to not hiding behind these false walls of academia, okay, and segmenting myself. One of the things that happens as people of color is we have these whole and complete selves, but when we come into institutions, we're told that this is the person you're allowed to be in this space, right? And so for a lot of us, we're told our spirits are something that we have to leave outside of the walls, and we kind of betray ourselves in that. So I'm going to be straight up honest with you. I am a spiritual being, and when this full 45 was sworn into office, and I know we in Orange County, and some of y'all, hopefully nobody in this room voted for this idiot, right? And we have to remember, these are not in my notes, but we have to remember what that means, right? When the majority of white people voted for this person who is not the neo-racist, right? Not one who pretends to be on the side of people of color, right? But one who has replaced white sheets with red caps, right? Those voters are also old school sheet-wearing racists, right? And so we cannot allow them to pretend that they are anything else. We have to remember what kind of racism we're confronting, right? This is a rollback. When they say, make America great again, they are talking about a time when none of us were here or we knew our place. So we have to remember what it is that they're talking about, okay? And so when he was sworn into office, I had a moment, and I don't know where your ideas come, but my ideas always come in the shower, or almost always come in the shower. So I had this shower moment where I said, well, you know, because many of us who've been active said, well, what are we going to do about this? Because it feels so overwhelming. And, you know, I don't think any of us thought he was going to actually win, right? I don't know if y'all thought he was going to actually win. I did not think he was going to actually win. I thought something was going to happen, something was going to intervene, you know, cooler heads would prevail. There are very few sheet-wearing racists. They prefer the neo-racists, and so they're going to all vote for Hillary, right? And so then when he won, it reminded me that no, there are old-school racists, and that rhetoric that he's spewing resonates with a lot of people, not just in Orange County, but if you think about California generally, everything between Los Angeles and the Bay Area, those are old school sheet-wearing racists, right? The greatest number of white supremacist groups are in the state of California, right? And so we need to remember that we have not erased them, although we were successful in kind of making what they said less popular over the last couple of decades. Now they're back. Now they feel vocal. And so I felt very overwhelmed by their, the way in which they've been emboldened, right? And so I'm in the shower and I'm thinking, how are we going to take him out? Because it feels daunting, right? And so the vision that came to me was, well, what if we surround the White House in a massive prayer circle? And my family is from Louisiana and Texas, so I was thinking about some of the tools in our arsenal, right? And I was like, that fool could just fall, like if we do every ritual, right? So I do what a lot of people do, and I got out the shower and I went on Facebook and I said, what if we surrounded the White House with a massive prayer circle? And people responded and they were like, that's a great idea. And I was like, okay, so some like faith leaders should do that, right? And all my friends were like, you should do that. And I'm like, I'm not a faith leader. And they were like, but you're a praying mama, right? And there's nothing like the power of a praying mama. So a beautiful team of about a dozen folks, some of which are faith leaders, Muslim leaders, Jewish leaders, Christian leaders, traditional practitioners of traditional African religion, indigenous religious leaders, all joined together. And so for the last couple of months, we've been planning something called Sacred Resistance. And so yesterday, we did not have enough people to actually surround the White House, but we did do a massive circle in front of the White House. And in 12 cities across the nation, there were public actions, including in Los Angeles, Long Beach, Inglewood, all had public actions to summon spiritual energy to topple the hate, fear, oppression, and let's say straight up evil that's embodied in that personage and that entire regime. So I'm saying that to say that I just got off the plane this morning coming back from that, and so I can't pretend like that energy is not coming with me. So I'm bringing that here. So what does that mean in terms of ethnic studies? What does that mean in terms of our charge as ethnic studies scholars and practitioners? Because we have to remember that ethnic studies is not just about what you learn and do inside of a classroom, but more importantly, it's how it informs the way that you behave, the way that you contribute to the liberation movement, right? So last week, I was fortunate enough to be at the National Association for Ethnic Studies conference in San Francisco, and I don't know if any of you all were there, but there was the new superintendent of San Francisco Unified School District, and he gave us some really encouraging numbers. And you know, and Dr. Zavala and others have been a part of the struggle to make ethnic studies a requirement in California. And so many school districts have adopted an ethnic studies requirement. Los Angeles Unified being the largest, and San Francisco Unified, I think, being probably the best in collecting data so far. What that superintendent told us, who was not involved in the struggle for this requirement, is that since the requirement was enacted, I think year before last, is that right, Dr. Zavala? Do you remember? I think it's year before last. They've seen a 1.2 GPA overall increase among students. Do you get what that means? That means that the average student GPA has gone from just over a 2.0 to above a 3.2. That is crazy. That is beautiful. That is a testament to the power of our work, because we talk about numbers, right? And I'm giving you numbers, right? We talk about numbers, and at Cal State LA, we like to hold up the graduation rate for Pan-African Studies students. The department that I chair, we have a 100% graduation rate and have for the last 6 years. That means we haven't lost a single student in 6 years in a university where the black graduation rate is 14%, right? So that means at Cal State LA, if you enter as a black student, that means 86 out of every 100 black students will not graduate unless you major in Pan-African Studies, where you are pretty much assured, unless you throw off our number, you know, don't do that, right? Don't send anybody who's going to throw off our number, right? It means that you are assured graduation. And it's not because we're giving you anything, because I cannot teach you math. Believe me, you don't want me to teach you math, right? It means that something happens when students set foot inside classrooms where we have shifted what education means, right? It means that that resonates beyond that classroom. I can't get you to pass math. I can't get you to pass English, right? It's something that's awakened in you when you set foot inside those classrooms. And so I want to lift up Chris Jackson, who was our minor, but I'm really going to claim him as a major in Pan-African Studies, who was involved in the Black Student Union and the Pan-African Student Collective, who was a leader on our campus, where I don't want to tell your story for you, Chris, but I watched him as he walked in become not simply a student in a classroom who happened to be enrolled in a major next door to us in sociology, but also see himself and know himself as a whole and complete person that included student leader, right? So being a dancer is part of who Chris is. You still dance? Okay. Being a dancer was part of who Chris is, right? Being a vocal out gay person is part of who Chris is. Being someone who says that is a way in which I have to transform my community is part of who Chris is. Being a man, cisgender man, who ascribes to womanism, who challenges other cisgender men to recognize that only weak men fear strong women, right, is who Chris is. And I think that you find that when you are in ethnic studies. So these numbers are not just numbers. They're about how we become all of ourselves and how all of ourselves are okay and necessary for the transformation of the world. And so these numbers are important. But the graduation numbers mean that we've created, we've developed, we've contributed to, and we've allowed for a Christopher Jackson. And so I want to lift him up. And I want to quickly tell my own story. So I am from Oakland, California. And you from Oakland? Oh, you live there, okay. You too? All right. So I'm from an area in Oakland, and Oakland had a sacred resistance. I was really scared that they weren't going to have a sacred resistance, and I was like, nah, my hometown has to have a sacred resistance. So they had one at Lake Merritt yesterday. So I'm from Oakland, California, and I'm from an area of Oakland. I'm from 10th Avenue, which is an area called Funktown. I still claim it. My students laugh at me because every now and then I'll actually throw up, signs, right, and be like, funk or die, right? I'm still from Oakland, right? And I was born in the 1970s. Don't tell nobody, Chris. I was born in the 1970s, but I'm 29, so don't let the math fool you, right? And what that means is two things. The 1970s in Oakland, California, was born a generation of people that we can define. Some people define it as the hip-hop generation. I'll define it, especially for Oakland, as the Panther Cub generation, right? And so what that means is that all of our parents were in and around the Black Panther Party. Your grandfather, right, was part of the preceding generation, right? So when we think about John Carlos and Tommy Smith and their work at San Jose State and student activism, student athlete activism, and the mentorship of people like Harry Edwards, right? It's really important for us to understand what was brewing in that space at that time. So we are heirs of that. So everybody of my generation from that space has a level of consciousness, right? That's just a part of the nature of Oakland in the 1970s. And so what that meant for me is there was never a question about who I was. I always knew. I was never ashamed of being a Black woman. I always recognized what that meant. I always knew that there is a struggle for liberation that I have to be a part of. And that was a part of everyone's DNA, even in places that were subject to really abject poverty and kind of the withdrawal of resources like my neighborhood was, right? And so as I'm coming of age in the 1990s, even though we have this kind of consciousness, my generation has this consciousness, right? We're also hit by outside forces. And later I would understand through the works of people like Maxine Waters that this was not something that happened because there were some deficiencies or some problem or some innate kind of criminal behavior among my people. It was kind of imposed by a system that wants to see us fail, right? So we're hit by the crack cocaine epidemic. And what that means for me, the reason I can still throw up Funktown is because my neighborhood, which is a beautiful neighborhood, right, is taken over by crack cocaine, and pretty much everyone in the neighborhood is either selling or using, right? And so people like my 8th grade boyfriend, Curtis Belton, fall victim and die, right? Lots of people die during that moment, during that generation. I lost more than a dozen of my close friends and family members during high school as a result of crack cocaine. So there's this kind of tearing apart of the neighborhood and of my generation, right? Most of my folks wound up dead or in jail, and that was the warning, right? So as I enter high school, and we have to think about how systems are created, Funktown is near the lake, which is near the closest high school is Oakland High School, which wasn't the worst high school in Oakland, right? It was actually a pretty okay high school. Not great, but a pretty okay high school in Oakland. East of us was a high school called Fremont High School, which was one of the worst high schools in the city. And just to think about how these systems are intentionally created, we were at war with another area of East Oakland called 69th Village, which was east of Fremont High School. We were west, they were east. What they did is they drew the boundaries for who goes to what school, is they had students from Funktown and students from 69th Village both go to Fremont High School. So what happens? My senior year of high school, so many people died either in the high school or in front of the high school, killed each other in gang wars, that they actually had to close the school down early, right, that year, right? And so this is kind of what we're living in. So my mother, who was a school teacher, single mom school teacher, right, refused to send me to Fremont High School. So I was blessed enough to go to Berkeley High School, which was the only school in the country at the time with a Black Studies department. And so for me, that was kind of the intervention, and again, I said, I'm going to be all of who I am. That was the intervention of spirit, right? That was my ancestors saying that we're not going to let you be sacrificed, right? And so I went to Berkeley High School, and I want to summon Richard Navies into this space because he was the chair of the department who had created a system where in high school we didn't have to take American history. We could take African American history. We didn't have to take English. We could take Black Gold English, right? And so all of our requirements were part of the Black Studies program. And so it really sowed these seeds in so many of us where we remembered who we were. And it kind of reminded us of all of those teachings that were part of being a Panther Cub, right? Panther Cub generation, right? And so even though these seeds were sown, eventually my neighborhood would take over, and I dropped out of high school. I wound up going to independent studies. I don't know if I've ever shared that with you, Chris, that I dropped out of traditional high school in the 11th grade and went to jail, actually, for a short period of time, and came back out and did what most people do in independent studies, which is nothing. Copy the answers out the back of the book and turn them into the teacher once a week, for which you earn a 4.0, right? You all know this. You all are future educators. This is how independent studies works, right? And in fact, I'm told it's still how it works, right? So that sounded like something horrible, but it really turned into a blessing because my mother compelled me to go back to regular high school my senior year, and I went because by then I had become a hair model and wanted to be the flyest thing at the prom, right? So I went back to regular high school thinking that after I graduated, I would catapult my career into being the most famous hair model in the world, right? How many hair models do we know, right? But that was my thinking. I was going to become a hair model. My mom made me at least apply to college, and I applied to Howard University. Here's the blessing of dropping out of high school and going up to independent studies. Independent studies was new. So nobody knew that the 4.0 that I earned was a result of me copying the answers out the back of the book, right? So I got in to Howard University, one of the best historically Black colleges in the entire country, right? Because of this 4.0, right? And I majored in the only thing that I could ever imagine myself spending 4 years doing, and that was African American studies. And there, my life transformed, and I really kind of stepped into myself. I became a scholar activist, and I was at least that while I was in Washington, D.C. Sometimes when I come back to Oakland, I'd be my old self. But eventually, over a 4-year period, I kind of lost some of that schizophrenic behavior and became all of who I was, and wound up going on to earn my PhD at USC. So I'm saying all that to say not so much about what that means for me, but about the importance of ethnic studies, that behind these numbers is the transformation of people, right? Is something that saves lives. My life was literally saved by Mr. Navies. And I'll say, giving another example, my cousin, who was also a student at Berkeley High School, did not take to Black Studies in the same way that I did. And another reason that I went to Howard is because the summer following my senior year, this cousin who had lived with us for a period, who I idolized, everybody has those people in their family, right, who are like, that's who I want to be, right? Like Trinice was the most beautiful, funny, brilliant person I'd ever met, and I wanted to be exactly like her. The summer after my senior year, she was shot and killed in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I'm saying that to say that I went to Las Vegas, Nevada to be with her and to be some of, what she was, and it was because of this transformation that took place that I didn't step into that fully. I stepped into who I was intended to be, right? And so I want us to understand that this conference and our commitment to ethnic studies is not just about a commitment to a discipline. This is not a disciplinary conference. This is not like when school teachers get together and talk about what to do with the, Common Core, right? This is about how do we take our children, pull them in, and allow them to become all of who they're intended to be. So that's my introduction, right? There's a couple of things that I want to what I want us to frame, or how I want to frame this, and what I want us to do. I talked about who currently occupies the White House, right? Some of you have been paying attention, and you know who his pick for Secretary of Education. Oh my God, this is like, did y'all used to watch Seinfeld before we had to boycott it? Yeah? Right, remember they had this bizarro world they used to talk about where everything was the exact opposite, right? This is totally bizarro world. Anytime Betsy DeVos can be the Secretary of Education, right? We are living in bizarro world. Everything is the exact opposite of what you would assume it should be, right? She is there to tear down public education. That's her purpose, to tear down public education. And everybody else who's in his Legion of Doom is there for the same exact reason, right? So when we think about how do you appoint the person who is almost single-handedly responsible for the mortgage meltdown and the what it means for black and brown families, these predatory loans for black and brown families, how do you put them in charge of the Treasury, right? Come on. How do you put in charge of make the Secretary of State, right? One who goes throughout the world and uses its resources and uses war to pull out resources for the enrichment of the capitalist class. This is crazy times. These are crazy times, and I'm saying we should totally laugh at it, because we got to laugh to keep from crying. Anytime you got Jeff Sessions as the head of the Department of Justice, somebody who is so racist that they couldn't even make it onto the bench as a federal judge, like 30 years ago. He was so racist by standards 30 years ago that he couldn't even be a federal judge, and now he's in charge of the Department of Justice, right? I'm saying this so we can laugh. Let's laugh, because you gotta laugh, right? But they have a plan, right? They have a plan. Manning Marable reminds us that these institutions don't just fall into being, right? Sometimes we think Trump is stupid. Trump is not stupid. Neither was George Bush. They were not stupid people, or at least in George Bush's case, he may have been stupid, right? But he's placed there deliberately by a system that needs him to be there so they can usher in particular outcomes, right? So this is all by design. Manning Marable reminds us that this is by design, right? These institutions are created to have the exact outcomes that they do, right? It's not accidental that black people constitute 29%, black men constitute 29% of the inmates in the state of California, where they're only 6.5% of the population, right? It is not accidental that black children constitute 26% of those who are suspended in the state of California, right? It's not accidental that black children are 24% of the foster care system and that black mothers are twice as likely to have their children taken by foster care as white mothers. It's not accidental. This is by design. So it's speeding up. So what this has meant, what January 20th of this year has meant, is that the plan is moving into rapid fire action. Right? It's always been the plan. It's always been the plan to exploit us, to super exploit us, black folks, brown folks, right? To exploit us for our labor, right? To enrich the capitalist class. That's always been the plan. Always been the plan, right? We live under a system of white supremacist, patriarchal, heteronormative capitalism, point blank, period, right? There is no such thing as reverse racism. White supremacy is the way in which racism is operationalized, right? And so we need to understand that. We need to understand that those are all interlocking systems. White supremacy goes hand in hand with patriarchy, right? So you cannot dismantle white supremacy without dismantling patriarchy. If you are spewing misogynistic, sexist rhetoric, if you are engaging in a way that is oppressive to women, you are contributing to white supremacy too, right? We can't ignore what Trump has done, what his regime has done to our trans babies, our children, right? When he says that children don't have the right to go to whatever restroom they choose to go to, right? That is contributing to white supremacy, it is contributing to patriarchy, and it is embedding an oppression of trans folks that affects all of us, regardless if you are cis or trans, right? When we think about the way in which capitalism and now this form of capitalism that we haven't seen, right? We haven't seen this kind of take hold, at least not in my lifetime, not in my 29 years have we seen this form of capitalism take hold, where they're saying it's okay for $7 an hour to be the federal minimum wage. Well, remember what just came out last week, right? This is the wealthiest cabinet in the history of the United States, with billionaires serving on the cabinet. And if we think about what capitalists do, what they do, it doesn't matter how much they're making as members of the cabinet. What they are there for is to feed a system, to embed rules that allow capitalism to flourish. And so if you feel dizzied, if you feel disoriented, that's because that's what's meant to be. Right? It's not accidental, right? We are living under a time of fascism, right? And not this kind of, people on the left throw around the term fascism all the time, right? So like even on my campus and maybe here too, they had I guess they call themselves socialists, used to come up to campus. Dr. Tejeda, you've seen them, right, with pictures of Barack Obama and a Hitler mustache and say he's a fascist, right? That was not fascism. Right? This is fascism, right? What we live under right now is fascism. My PhD is in political science, right? And so when we talk about what fascism is, we're really talking about a right-wing nationalistic regime. That's what we live under, right? And so fascism, one of the tools of fascism, is to engage in a way that keeps us disoriented. So much is coming at us. Sometimes we don't see what's happening, right? We don't know whether or not we need to go protest, the Muslim ban or stop the building of walls. We don't know whether or not we need to go to schools and protect our babies as they walk into the bathrooms that they desire, right? Or feel the need to go into. We don't know whether or not we need to protect women's right to choose. We have folks who are now saying that, if a woman's fetus dies inside of her, she has to keep that fetus in her body until it delivers naturally. Right? You all have heard this last week, this came out, right? So this is what the so-called pro-life people are talking about, that a potential life, or in the case of a fetus that dies inside of you, it's not even a life. So I don't even know what you're talking about, how this could be pro-life, right? That matters, but what doesn't matter is the actual lives of people who are walking here on this earth right now, right? So we are so dizzied by so much that's coming at us that sometimes we don't know how to move. And that is the tactic, the primary tactic of fascism. And so what must we do? I talked about resistance, right? And I want to summon Henry Highland Garnett, who I hope many of you have studied, into this space when he was working to end chattel slavery. He gave an address to the slaves of the United States of America, and he said, "Resistance, resistance, resistance. No oppressed people have ever secured their liberty without resistance," right? And we have to remember that we are oppressed people. This is not something that we're imagining, right? This is actual oppression that is levied upon us and levied upon our brothers and sisters. And so we have to resist it. We have to beat it back, right? That's what the sacred resistance moment yesterday was about, and what the sacred resistance piece of this work is about, right? So moving forward, as we kind of think about the tools that we have, we're remembering that as we resist, we win. When we fight, we win, right? And there's never been a time when the resistance movement hasn't won, right? The only time we fall is when we give up, right? And so we have to resist. And so we need to remember that that sacred piece of it is what won the Haitian Revolution, right? It's what won the end to chattel slavery. Lincoln did not free us. I know you all are teaching this, right? Mama Harriet freed us. How about that, right? Nat Turner freed us. How about that? Denmark Vesey freed us. How about that, right? That won the end of the first wave of mass lynching was Ida B. Wells and the Black club women who were summoning in this energy and this connection with each other. And so when we talk about resistance, we have to use every tool, including spiritual tools. And I don't mean to come up here as I'm not a faith leader, right? But I want to say we can't pretend like our faith is not part of this work, right? We also need to think about the other tools that we have. We need to remember that what the Panthers did in the 1960s, going to Sacramento with guns, right, that ain't gonna work no more, right? So when we flew out to D.C., we didn't talk about, we better arm ourselves in front of the White House, because guess what would have happened, right? They would have taken us out, right? But there are other arms that we have, right? Our coming together is an arming of ourselves. Our unity is an arming of ourselves. The way in which we educate our students, our families, each other, and our community is an arming of ourselves. And so I want to move forward into how ethnic studies is part of the resistance, right? And more than part of the resistance, so we have to have the resistance. We have to resist what is. We have to resist their plans for us, their plans that tear apart families, their plans that send our people to prison, their plans that create houselessness, their plans that create people who are hungry in a place like the United States. How can we be hungry? We have to remember this world is abundant. There is enough. There is more than enough for all of us, right? The only reason that they pretend like scarcity is a reality is so that we can fight each other, right? And so their plans for us are what create houselessness. Their plans for us is what creates mental health crises, right? Because how can you not lose it? All of us, let's be honest, all of us are a little bit crazy, right? I am. I just try to keep it together as much as possible, but sometimes you may catch me on YouTube cussing somebody out, right? And that's the moment. That's the moment when the mental health stuff is very evident, right? And we all have it. We all have it. You cannot live in a system that is created and built on your back without having mental health conditions, right? And Asada Shakur says, only the strong go crazy, the rest just go along. So join me in my insanity, please, right? So I'm saying we have to resist, and we also have to have an alternative vision, right? So we have to resist their plans for us, and we have to come together and summon that ancestral energy and power, right? Summon the energy that vibrates in this room right here when we think about what we are pledged to do, what people who are giving up their Sunday, giving up their weekend to do. There is energy that's circulating here, right? Summon that energy and develop a vision for our liberation. A part of that liberation is doing the intellectual work. And so as ethnic studies students and scholars and faculty members and teachers, I want to compel us to remember that ethnic studies is not part of an academic institution. We're here. I'm glad that we're getting a place here, that you are teaching classes here, that we're about to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Black Studies, right, which was fought for in 1968 at San Francisco State University when students, community members, professors, and teachers demanded that we not give so much of our energy to only 1/8 of the world's population, right? People of color, we are the majority, right? So we need to remember that we represent 7/8 of the world's population, right? And so they demanded that we not create institutions with our tax dollars that give priority to European folks, right, or European descended folks. And they fought for that, and in 1968, the first Department of Black Studies was created, followed shortly by an entire College of Ethnic Studies, the only one in the nation, and departments like mine, which is the second oldest in the country, birthed in 1969, where black folks and brown folks came together and said that, you know, you're not going to give, there is no segmented liberation, right? So we want it together. So that's why you have a Department of Pan-African Studies and a Department of Chicano Studies that were created at the exact same time in Los Angeles. We have to remember that history, right? We have to remember that even though that fascist regime will try and dupe us into believing that our enemies are each other, right? We have to look up. We have to look up and remember what creates divisions, right? And who creates divisions and why, right? So we are not part of academia. They never wanted us here. They didn't want us to have a class, let alone a department, let alone a college, let alone an ethnic studies requirement in the state of California. They did not want this. So we are not a part of academia. We are part of an intellectual tradition, a sacred intellectual tradition that ties us to our communities. In Pan-African Studies, we say that we are the intellectual arm of the revolution. That is what ethnic studies is meant to be, right? Our vision is to use this space, to use every tool in our arsenal, every weapon in our arsenal to lead to the transformation of this world, right? And so we have to remember to vision, to step back from all that they're throwing at us and develop a hawk's eye view of what it is we want, right? And why ethnic studies is so important to what we want. By committing ourselves to ethnic studies, right, what we're committing to do is to telling the truth in our classrooms, right? To saying, you know, no, we will not celebrate Columbus Day, right? No, we will not celebrate President's Day. We will not celebrate Lincoln as the freer of the slaves. We will not celebrate Andrew Jackson, right? We will not pretend like, you know, all of these so-called leaders were not part of the annihilation of indigenous people, right? We will not pretend like we don't stand on somebody else's land, right, without calling their names and asking for their blessing and doing the work that they would have us do, right? And so it's important that we tell the truth in our classrooms, right? And it's also important that we use our classrooms to remember that we're committed to ethnic studies, not studying ethnic. Y'all understand the difference, right? We are not gorillas in the mist, right? We don't want some removed anthropological approach to who we are, right? Ethnic studies is about saying our position is important. There's an African proverb that says, until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero. Until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero. Let's create lions. Let's be lions. Let's tell our own stories. Let's say it's important for us to speak from our own voice, right? We are engaging in a critical pedagogy that says that what happens in our communities is part of what happens in the classroom. And so our students, our young people have voice, that we are the facilitators of an intellectual process when we're educators, but we don't have all the answers, right? We're engaging in a sharing of intellectual tradition, right, that will empower us to do the third thing that we need to do as ethnic studies scholars, which is to transform this world, right? And transform our schools at the same time. I don't know if you know, I'm sure not all of you are from Orange County, but my kids go to school in LAUSD. Do we have LAUSD educators or graduates in this room? You're a student, good. What school do you go to? Oh, social justice. Okay, so it's a social justice school. Okay, it's a what? Middle school. That's great. Most schools are not like yours, right? My daughter is also a middle school student. My oldest daughter is 13 years old. She's an 8th grader, and she goes to one of the best schools in LAUSD. She goes to Laces, and you went to Laces. Okay, down the street, right. Los Angeles Unified School District, are you all aware of this required random search policy that they have? Yes? So in LAUSD, every single high school, Laces is combined with a high school. It's a middle school and high school all on the same campus. Every high school in LAUSD is required to do random searches every single day. Every single day, right? What that means is that students are taken out of their classes and searched for contraband, right? Educators in LAUSD, tell me if I'm lying. Y'all know about this, right? Taken out of their classrooms and searched for contraband. What would you all think is contraband? What are they looking for? Drugs and weapons, right? As a parent, that's what I would assume that's what they're looking for. Let me tell you what contraband includes. I'm sure it includes drugs and weapons, but it also includes highlighters, whiteout, hand sanitizer. These are contraband items that our children are being physically searched for. In school, they are taken out of, my daughter was taken out of her English class, missed 20 minutes of class time to be searched, along with, and this is the other thing we need to pay attention to, I think it was 7 other children, all but one was black or brown, right? At Laces, where there are not that many black or brown students, right? Searched for contraband and then set back into the classroom as if this is normal and they're supposed to go back into studying, right? So we need to think about what it means that when there's a fight at a school ground, no longer is there the nice security guard like I had when I was in middle school, Mr. Williams, who would greet everybody, especially the ones who were naughty, with a very firm handshake, right? And say good morning, which was a warning that you better not mess up today, right? Because if you do, then Mr. Williams would pull you and you would go into his office and you write things a whole bunch of times. I will not fight Jesse Coulter. I'm not telling on myself, right? Instead, who do we have on our school grounds? Actual LAPD, armed with guns. In the trunks of their cars, many of them have actual assault weapons, right? That are treating our children like suspects, not students, right? This is what's happening. Last week, so my daughter was searched 2 weeks ago. Last week, her friend, who happens to be black, right, was carrying a little white girl on her back, horsing around during lunchtime. The white girl falls off her back. They're friends, right? Falls off her back and busts her head, and the ambulance had to come. It was a horrible thing to happen, but it's not the fault of the girl who's playing with her friend, right? The police pull her out of class and question her without the presence of her parents, right? Without the presence of her parents, and are insinuating that she engaged in some criminal act by having a little girl on her back. She's already traumatized. Her little friend just went to the hospital, and now the police come in and put her in a little room and question her as if she's a suspect. This is a student. This is a baby. This is a 13-year-old, right? And so this is what's happening in our classrooms, and I realize I'm talking a long time, so I'm going to get to the point. The work that we need to do as ethnic studies scholars and students and practitioners and teachers is about transforming the system outside of us and the system that is our academic institutions. We need to drive law enforcement off of our campuses. It's no place for police. There's no place for police on school grounds, right? The work that we do has to be tied back to this revolutionary practice that resists and ushers in a counter vision for what kind of world that we want to live in. We want to live in a world where our children live and walk freely, first at our schools and also in our communities. And so I'm going to close just by saying that we have to get to work. We have to get to work. This commitment to ethnic studies is not just about committing to an academic discipline. It's about creating a transformative process that creates freedom and justice and the peace that only comes with it. Thank you.